2925 GY, 3981 AC. Galactic Council Hall, Unity Station, Terminus, Galactic Council Neutral Zone.
You are out of your mind! That chamber between your eyes must be empty if you believe for even a second that the Reich will allow that!
An angry voice echoed throughout the massive hall. An irate human loomed over his desk, his once pristine uniform now ruffled. His hand pressed into the desk, slightly red from slamming it earlier. His free hand pointed accusingly at another human, sitting 5 seats down from him. The other man rounded on him.
Oh! I didn't realize you determined the kingdom's actions. Why, I'll ring the king right now and inform him of his dethronement.
His voice was more restrained, but just so.
You are being intentionally dense and you fucking know it!
His anger was slightly undercut by the automatic translator, silencing the expletive.
This will have irreparable effects on the Reich, and I cannot in good faith stand by while you screw us over. You are being dramatic.
All refocused their attention to the present, quickly forgetting whatever thought had distracted them, then craned their neck towards his partner with a rumble. The other crystalline had a glamorous, if slightly dull, blue and purple coloration. Shards of rounded stone formed a wave-like structure on its back. 5th-century nose formed a semicircle on its upper hand, and more of sharp stones below. Cracks in its form, and a slight slouch belied its age. The 2 crystallines looked like statues, sitting behind their desk in the council chamber. All's much sharper and solid form marked them as the lesser, its own crystals a green and orange colour.
What are they arguing over now?
All slowly rumbled out.
Trade routes,
Arrow answered simply, not turning to look All's way. Their baritone voice carried far despite his low volume.
Again?
A slow nod was All's response. What the Yeno called a sigh escaped, but other races likened it to a distant rock slide. All looked to the 6-seat wide desk. Each chair sat a representative of one of the pillars of humanity. A flag for each nation hung from the desk, something the rest of the galaxy had taken after. The 2 in question sat on opposite sides, a clearly futile effort to curb their bickering. The Kroaxan Reich and Kingdom of Ordebarn. Though arguments within the council hall are frowned upon, most had long since given up on trying to stop the squabbling, and the rest were just glad that they only had to deal with 6 humans now. Besides, these asinine arguments provided some levity against the tedious multi-hour council meetings. The dark grey double-breasted Kroaxi dress uniform was clearly not made for the wild motions its wearer currently displayed. Blue piping and platinum tassel shifted as he spoke. The platinum wolf head enshrined on his blue half-cape growled as it twisted around the representative's body. A dark grey cap sat perfectly on the desk, not moving once since it was placed there, ignorant of the storm around it. His opponent wore an extravagantly tailored suit. A light blue brassard that went up to his right shoulder was embroidered with the royal crest. A matching beret sat dangerously close to the edge of the desk. His hair was slicked back into an aristocratic ponytail, and bobbed with his more fluid, but equally erratic, movements. Ignoring the 2 standout figures for a moment, all turned his attention toward the rest of the human team. The figure next to the Kroaxi representative sat calmly in his chair. He represented the Kroansburg Star Empire. His current demeanour matched the Kroax' usual demeanour, cold and collected, but if you put him in a room with the Orgaborn representative, their nation's shared heritage was obvious. Both men wore similar uniforms, with the Korani uniform being light grey with green piping. The most notable difference being that while the Reich had kept the half-cape, the Korani elected for a much more subtle replacement. His left shoulder and upper sleeve coloured the Empire's green, a golden serpent wrapped around the arm. Next to him sat a woman dressed in an ornate white uniform. Red piping and golden tassels put off a regal, almost holy vibe. Almost. A red cape hung from her neck, the Imperium's Aquila embroidered on the back in gold. The representative of the Holy Orlan Stellar Imperium ignored the squabble as she carried out a much more hushed but equally intense argument with her other neighbour, gesticulating wildly. Both of them had their peaked caps resting on the desk before them, light grey and red respectively. Her opponent, the Unitary Star Republic representative, was much more subdued in his arguments. He wore a wave green parade uniform, his peaked cap partially covering his eyes. His arms crossed over the red front of his uniform. Between the Unitary and Aldebaran representatives sat the Stellar Federation representative. He wore a simple black suit, his hair parted to the side. He adjusted a pair of wireframe glasses before sharing an exasperated look with the Kroani representative. The Ataro delegation sat next to the humans, their longest allies and the second youngest species. They made various attempts to distance themselves whenever arguments broke out, while the braver few made futile attempts to calm the belligerents. They were dressed in the blue and white dress uniforms of their military, each one a trained military lawyer. The exception being two, a man and woman, who wore the black and gold uniform of the Exploration Fleet, and the white and orange uniform of the Rescue Fleet, respectively. All turned to observe the rest of the council, their head traversing like a sluggish turret. The reptilian Banneroni and Tesconi looked to be placing bets over who would get scolded by the speaker first this time. The two species have been at each other's throats for millennia. Unlike the humans, however, they have long discovered you can't spend every moment fighting. Some of those conflicts have been caused by the vague similarities between them. All learned the easiest way to tell them apart was the eyes and teeth. The Tesconi had 2 pairs of eyes and wide frames, while the Banneroni had multiple rows of teeth and angular builds. It seemed like an obvious difference, but it took all longer than they'd ever admit to figure it out. The Banneroni wore a crimson and black dress uniform with a side cape that hung from the protruding spines on their backs, while the Tesconi wore light grey suits. Across from all, the representative of the Leno Federal Republic and her team sat. The 4-species nation only had a single representative, something the humans could learn from, but made sure to fill out their team with someone from every member race. 2 out of the 4 dressed in suits, the military advisor wearing Leno's green and white dress uniform, and the insectile Orfenshi forewent any clothing. As the team shifted between their discussion and observing the argument, the newest members gawking at the audacity, the representative herself focused most of her attention on a datapad in front of her, taking brief glances at the Rhodesians across the chamber. Said Rhodesians' attention was split between the Leno team and the humans. In particular, all caught more than a few of the miniature mammals eyeing the unitary representative. Their purple-gold uniforms denoted a clear hierarchy even to all's untrained eyes. The lead diplomat, almost drowning in gold adornments, and holding her ostentatious helmet in the crook of her arm, studiously kept her gaze level and refrained from focusing on one party. While the Leno team displayed amusement and indifference, the diplomats of the Cricketar Holy Empire showed little more than disdain for the display. Ever the perfectionists, they took exception to much of the galaxy, but the humans in particular. They also refused to sit during these meetings, a likely factor in their growing displeasure as the humans' argument extended it, albeit not by much. Their flowing white robes contrasted with the various suits and uniforms most other species wore. At the back of the congregation, a solitary figure stood dressed in red, their face obscured by the fabric that hung from their tall conical hat. An inquisitor. The Borgendesh diplomats clapped their claws in excitement whenever an argument broke out. They were easily the most amused by the spectacle, while the diplomatic drones of the Orwenquian hive watched on with impassive faces. When all turned their senses to the Penelocian diplomat, they were immediately caught off guard by the intense look he was giving the Coraxi representative. In fact, it wasn't just him. Each of the members of the Hegemonist team stared at the man with almost hungry expressions. It seemed he noticed as he stopped mid-argument to glare back. Aldebar's representative looked ready to continue before following his compatriot's gaze. As one, the rest of the humans registered the quiet, and soon the humans and Penelocians had entered the stare-down. Though only the latter knew why. The sudden silence was deafening, as everyone took nervous glances between the two parties. Even the drones seemed wary. The speaker took advantage of the quiet, resuming the meeting before anyone could ask questions. As everyone turned their attention to the front, the room returned to normal. All did their best to push the interaction from their mind. Odd, all grumbled. Arrow responded with a low, 2925 GY, 3981 AC. Galactic Council Hall, Unity Station, Terminus, Galactic Council Neutral Zone. It hadn't even been a year, much less 5, since the last council meeting, and already all found themselves sitting back behind their desk. The mood around the chamber was much more somber this time. Emergency meetings were never a good thing. Best case scenario, someone important, a leader or diplomat, died in office. Worst case scenario... Whatever it was, all was not too worried. They have weathered both galactic storms and extragalactic invaders before. The silence was unnerving, however. Ever since the humans joined, it was never quiet. If it wasn't the Croaxi and Orderbungs going at it, then it was the Unitaries and Orlans, or the Helios Empire and Nautilus Federation, before them. All shuddered, as he remembered what it was like after the collapse of the Big Three, before the Pillars rose to power. The Council achieved even less than it usually did. All was not a betting rock, but they were willing to put down credits that if humanity ever united, they would still find things to bicker over. But now, it was as silent as the tomb. Looking around, all saw the issue. Every human representative was there, except one. The Croaxan representative was missing, and if all had to guess, was also the reason they were all gathered here now. As their heads swiveled across the chamber, he noticed one species stand out. The Peniolochians didn't look sad or somber. No, they looked proud. Their feathers puffed out, beaks held high. It looked like they all had even gotten their crests brushed, and were only moments from spreading their wings in triumph. It seems they might be involved with the disappearance of the Reich's representative. The speaker, another ancient Yeno, stood behind their podium like a statue. For what felt like an eternity, everyone sat or stood. Not a word was spoken. The only sound breaking the heavy silence was the occasional sniffle from the human representatives. Under closer inspection, all noticed that of all the representatives, it was Audibars that seemed affected by the loss the most. He sat in his seat, his hands clenched into tight, shaking fists. Every now and then he would look up at the Peniolochian diplomats, tears threatening to break free. If looks could kill, they would have died 5 times over. Suddenly, red light bathed the chamber. As the emergency lights flashed, the klaxon sounded. Panicked cries and yelps rose out from the diplomats. The humans jumped at the sudden sound, but seemed otherwise unperturbed by the alarm. Had it not been for Orl's stoic constitution, then he might have been too jumpy to notice the look shared between the humans. The Ataros seemed to have noticed it too. Confusion and curiosity began replacing their panic. Outside, the massive crystalline windows behind the speaker, far in the distance, there was a blue flash. Not just one, numerous other flashes followed quickly after. There must have been dozens, no, hundreds. Now worry filled the silence, grief forgotten. For the next few excruciating minutes, everyone watched as the ships got closer. All knew who they belonged to, and judging by the horrified looks on the Peniolochians' faces, so did they. A massive ship faded into view. As it sailed by the window, lights illuminated the bow. KRS Glushwans. If the blue hull of Corax's Imperial Guard wasn't a dead giveaway, then that was. The most infamous of the Kaiser von Tiefenthaler-class dreadnoughts. The name Glushwans has graced many Coraxan bows. Though the ship was always different, they all had the same position. It is the lead ship of Heimflotte Kronsheim, and personal bodyguard of the Kaiser's cruiser. And speak of the devil, just behind the dreadnought floated a blue cruiser. The name of the bow read simply KS Nakshira. If avians could sweat, then the Peniolochians would have already drowned. The cruiser disappeared behind the station as the dreadnought remained outside the window. Minutes later, the door to the chamber slid open. The barely audible hiss of the hydraulics echoed around the chamber. Then boots. So many boots. An avalanche of footsteps approached. The Imperial Guard flooded the chamber, the pikes of their gun bursts creating a forest of spikes. Black gas masks and platinum-spiked helmets with golden walls adorning the brow blocked their faces from sight. Long blue trench coats and black leather gauntlets covered them completely. Black jackboots marched across the ground. Glistening platinum-plated cuirass and pauldrons. Blue half-capes trailed behind them as they strode across the floor. The boots stopped. Guardsmen now stood behind every single diplomat. All noted an especially heavy presence behind the Peniolokians. Before anyone could react, a pair of solitary footsteps sounded from the entrance. They felt heavy and powerful, like a massive beast bearing down on them. From the tunnel, a woman emerged. She wore the most decorated Coraxan uniform they'd ever seen. White trousers with black piping, a dark blue, double-breasted coat, and white peaked cap. The wolf's head stared down the diplomats, daring them to move. Platinum decorated her coat and hemmed her half-cape. Scarlet eyes stared out from above a black respirator, golden hair tied up in a tight bun. Her saber and pistol sat sheathed and holstered on her hips. She walked with confidence, striding towards the podium. The speaker quickly stepped aside as she reached him, offering a polite bow as quickly as his crystalline body allowed. She offered a polite nod in return as she stood behind the podium. For a moment, she said nothing, just stared out at the diplomats. When she did speak, her voice came out hoarse and raspy, on the verge of a coughing fit.
Many of you do not know who I am.
Despite the pain, her voice carried across the chamber with ease.
And had things gone accordingly, you never would have. But, unfortunately, there are many things we cannot foresee.
She glared at the Peniolokians.
I am Adelheid Hoffman, daughter of Kaiser Gustav Hoffman, and, as of a month ago, sitting Kaiserin of the Coraxan Reich.
Silence. No one dared make a sound. The air felt thick and heavy, like a layer of tar on their shoulders.
3 months ago, war broke out between the Coraxian Reich and the Peniolokian hegemony, over mining rights in a few backwater systems, no less. Such a simple war should have been over quickly.
The Kaiserin coughed lightly.
It should have faded into history as a footnote. A waste of lives, nothing more. But in an act of either desperation or a poor attempt at turning the tide, the Peniolokians escalated. A fleet appeared, of a Koingsheim, a distraction. When our ship sailed out to meet them, a smaller force detached and made for our capital, where they launched a barrage of chemical weapons.
No one moved. Chemical weapons on civilians? There were very few things the galaxy agreed on, and the usage of chemical weapons against civilians was one of them. Everyone was now looking at the Peniolokians with a mix of horror and rage. Whether they were performance or genuine was up in the air. Except the Beneroni and Tesconi, who kept their faces perfectly neutral. A few diplomats spoke, but the Kaiserin waved a hand for silence. Then she reached up and removed the mask. Gasps escaped various diplomats, and more than a few looked green. Though the Peniolokians were among the latter, all noticed a look of victory and pride flash across their faces. A vicious scar travelled from the collar of her uniform up to her ear. The right side of her jaw looked like it had been bathed in boiling oil. The Kaiserin replaced her mask.
Millions of lives were claimed in the attack, with millions more critically wounded, including our now late diplomat, Armin Schmidt. And... her voice broke slightly. My father, the previous Kaiser.
She took a steadying breath.
I did not come here seeking mediation for our conflict, nor do I seek reparations.
The Peniolokians looked confused.
We are very capable of extracting our reparations,
she growled, as she stared down the Peniolokians. They gulped, all pride gone.
No, I came here for a much simpler reason. A reminder. When humanity was discovered by the galactic community, we put forward a single rule. It is one of our most ancient rules. Treat us how you would like to be treated. And while I fear I will never know why the hegemony chose to act the way it did, thankfully they have made their desired treatment very clear.
She wasn't making a threat. There was no boasting or arrogance. Even the calm corners that the Coraxi were famous for was gone. Her voice was filled with cold rage. This was a promise, and the Burrs knew it. Without another word, she turned and strode out of the chamber. Her guards stood by for a minute longer. No one dared move. All swore they saw one of the guards' masks shift in a smirk as they stared down the Imperialokians, fidgeting in their seats. Then, as swiftly as they arrived, they left. As soon as the door closed shut, the Imperialokians were on their feet, communicating rapidly with someone. Quietly, the rest of the diplomats filtered out of the room. All had too many thoughts running through their head to make sense of. Slowly, the Yeno diplomats left the chamber behind everyone else. With what passed for a shrug, all followed Arrow to the ship. 2926 GY, 3982 AC. Orbit of Ulaqnamor, Penialokian hegemony. 4 months was all it took. 4 months after the Kaiserin's declaration, Korax's ship sat in orbit above Ulaqnamor, the hegemony's cradle world. A live broadcast went out. With rapt attention, the galaxy watched with a mix of curiosity and horror. Everyone expected a bombardment, but then a single shot rang out. It sailed through the atmosphere, exploding above the capital city. Then the fleet turned and left, leaving the battleship that fired, KRS Himmel von Suren, looming above. Then the broadcast cut to black. 1 shot and 2 weeks was all it took for the city to die. For the first few days, nothing had happened. Just as the planet let out a sigh of relief, the first victim fell. People all across the city suffered seizures, falling into comas soon after. Within a few days, the hospitals were overwhelmed with patients. It wasn't until the end of the first week that the first death occurred. After that, the city fell like dominoes. It was only then, when the message was sent and there was no life to be found anywhere within the urban sprawl below, that the battleship, now known simply as the Grim Reaper, left the planet's orbit. Following the Ulaqnamor genocide, all became fascinated with humans. This was far from the first or worst atrocity, but many times the powers that be go through great pains to bury them in myth and hearsay, not broadcast them to the galaxy at large. What would drive one to commit such an atrocity so publicly? That question gnawed at their mind incessantly. So between shifts of organizing papers and attending dull meetings, they dug into the humans' past. They searched centuries of documents and records, eventually coming to a conclusion. They didn't care. There was no deeper meaning. It was not some power play or threat. The Penialokians crossed a line, and they needed to be punished. An eye for an eye, if they were to use a human saying. All found the simplicity rather refreshing. Of course, that wasn't all found during their search. While looking through humanity's pre-space age history, all found a familiar name. Suren. 1886 GY, 2943 AC. Suren. Mardo Republic. Gaia. The once idyllic little town was now little more than smouldering ruins. Stone houses reduced to ankle-high piles of rubble, rows ripped up and their stones thrown about like straw in the wind. For miles around, the earth was black and pitted. On either side of the town, trench networks burrowed through the ground like a hive. Men and equipment skittered amongst them like ants. Suren had been abandoned only days before the fighting reached it. Now only the dead and damned called it home. Just before dawn, under the cover of darkness, along the Friesberg trenches, Imperial troopers gathered. Donning masks and gloves, they each took a deep breath, waiting. For the last week they prepared, digging as subtly as they could, taking as many precautions as possible. Now it was time. Massive canisters were carried out from the rear and placed before hoses, dug through the parapets into no man's land. With shaky hands, the soldiers hooked them up. Their breath fogged up the glass eyes of their masks. Their leather gloves creaked as grips were adjusted on rifles and machine guns. It was silent. Then a cool breeze blew across the trench, towards the enemy lines. Canisters hissed as their valves were opened. A few soldiers peeked over the parapet. A cloud of sickly yellow air drifted towards the Mardens. The skies of Suren filled with chlorine gas, and soon the Mardens began to cough and hack. Many tried to escape, crawling out of the trench, and were shot down by the waiting Imperials. After the Ulaqnamor massacre, the Kaiserin stepped down, shedding any protection her position might have offered her. For months she waited for the dreaded summons, but to her astonishment, none ever came. When it was clear the galactic community did not intend to punish her, she imposed a self-exile. The Bloody Empress soon faded into myth and folklore. At the heart of the Reich, towering over all who entered the Imperial Square, a monument was erected. A woman dressed in the garb of the Kaiserin stood tall amidst the ruins of a city, hand resting on her pistol, saber held high. Her scarlet irises, the only color on the dark metal statue. In the background above the ruins, a battleship ascended into the sky. Below, a plaque read, "To all those taken from us, and to the one who avenged our fallen."